Imagine working miles away from home. You're sending every dollar you can back to your family, calling them every few days, sharing stories and dreams. Then nothing. The calls stop. That's what happened to the family of Manuel Mosqueda Ruiz.
He was just 25 years old.
Yeah, a construction worker from Mexico found murdered in Florida back in 2004. And his case, it's still unsolved. But there's hope, thanks to some new DNA technology.
This case, it shows just how hard it is for investigators to solve crimes when immigrant communities are involved.
Right. And today we're going to dive deep into Manuel's story, figure out what led to his death, what roadblocks the investigators hit, and how this new technology might finally get some answers.
We're basing this deep dive on a Crime Junkie podcast episode. They really broke this case down.
So let's go back to August 2004. We're in Freeport, Florida. A landowner named Billy Evans, he's going to his fishing spot on his property.
Driving his golf cart, like he always does.
Right, driving toward the river. And something catches his eye.
A bunch of buzzards circling over these woods. Now, this area, it was known as a dumping ground. People dumped everything there. Trash old appliances.
So at first, Billy doesn't think much of it. Figures it's a dead animal. But as he gets closer,
he sees a pair of boots sticking out from the bushes. And as he gets closer, the smell hits him. It's definitely not an animal.
He rushes back to his trailer to call the sheriff's office. This is 2004, so no cell phones like we have now.
Right, and when the deputies get there, they find the body of a young man. Red shirt, blue jeans, work boots. The body's so decomposed they can't tell who it is right away, but they find a wallet.
And inside, a Mexican voter ID card.
That card, it's the first clue. They think it's Manuel Mosqueda Ruiz. They can't be sure just by looking, but the fingerprint on the card, later on that confirms it.
It's crazy to think that a simple ID card could be the only thing that tells you who someone is after something so awful happened.
Yeah. Now, the crime scene itself, it wasn't easy. There were drag marks going from the body to a dirt road nearby and some tire tracks, but that was about it.
They even took some debris, like a can, hoping to find trace evidence. But nothing really came of that.
One important thing, they didn't find any bullet casings and very little blood, so they figured Manuel wasn't killed right there. They thought he was murdered somewhere else, and then his body was dumped in the woods.
Which makes sense. Billy hadn't seen or heard anything strange in the days before finding the body.
The autopsy showed they were right. Cause of death, a single gunshot wound. The forensics team. They figured Manuel died around August 11th or 12th.
So now they know who the victim is, they have an idea of when he died, and they have a crime scene that looks like someone tried to hide the body. What do the investigators do next?
Well, they had that Mexican ID card, so they knew Manuel was from Mexico. They got in touch with the Mexican consulate in Atlanta to try and find his family back in Mexico.
I bet going through all those international channels and paperwork wasn't easy, especially with such a sensitive situation.
It wasn't. It was complicated and took time. Meanwhile, the investigators in Freeport, they were trying to figure out what Manuel's life in the U.S. was like, based on his clothes and the kind of work in the area. They thought he was a construction worker.
So they started talking to other construction workers, especially in the Hispanic community, hoping to find someone who knew him.
But it wasn't that simple. They ran into a wall of silence. A lot of the workers were undocumented. They were scared that if they talked to the police, they'd be deported.
It makes you wonder how many cases go unsolved because people are too afraid to talk.
It's a big problem in these kinds of investigations, for sure. But they did get a break. They found out that a lot of construction companies, they paid their undocumented workers in cash at local convenience stores.
So they decided to focus on those stores.
Yeah, especially one Shell gas station near where they found Manuel's body.
Did they find anything there?
They did. They hit the jackpot. They found out that Manuel had bought prepaid phone cards from that gas station. And the last time he bought one was August 11th, just days before they found his body.
Those phone cards, those are a goldmine for investigators. They can track the calls, see who he was talking to, maybe find connections to other people.
Exactly. And in this case, it was the key. When they looked at the phone card records, they saw the last call Manuel made. It was on the night of August 11th. And that call, it was to Mexico.
So could this be the lead that finally connected them to his family?
It was about a month after they found Manuel's body. The consulate in Atlanta tracked down his family in a small village in Mexico. And yeah, that last phone call, it was to his wife.
I can't imagine how his family must have felt. Relieved to hear from someone, but also scared, knowing it probably wasn't good news.
It was devastating. Manuel's wife said the call had been totally normal. He hadn't said anything about any trouble or anything unusual, nothing to make her think something was wrong.
So they finally found his family, but they still didn't know what happened to Manuel or who might have done it.
Right, but talking to his family did give them a better picture of Manuel's life and why he came to the U.S.
What did his family tell him?
They said he was a hard worker, dedicated to his family. He just wanted a better life for his wife and kids. He'd come to the U.S. in 2003, just before his second child was born. His brother-in-law was already living and working in Texas and helped him find construction jobs.
So he was sending money back home, talking to his family every few days. Then after August 11th, nothing.
His family said they heard rumors that something had happened to Manuel, but no one would tell them what. Again, that wall of silence in the community.
That's so frustrating. Someone out there might know something important, but they're too scared to say anything. Did the investigation stop there?
Pretty much, yeah. They tried everything, but they couldn't find any of the important details. They didn't know where Manuel lived, what company he worked for, who he traveled with, so the case went cold.
Years went by, and Manuel's family was left with no answers, no justice. It's just awful.
It is. But the story doesn't end there. In 2017, a retired detective named Steve Sunday, he decided to reopen the case.
Now that's what I like to hear. A cold case getting another look. What made Detective Sunday take on Manuel's case?
He'd been with the Walton County Sheriff's Office back in 2004. He even went to the crime scene with the original detective. He wasn't working on the case then, but it stayed with him. And when he came back to work part-time on cold cases, Manuel's file was one of the first ones he picked up.
Sounds like you really wanted to get some answers for Manuel and his family. How did he approach it?
He realized that the language barrier had been a big problem in the first investigation. Luckily, there was another officer in the department who spoke Spanish and really understood the Hispanic community.
It's so important to have someone who can bridge that gap between cultures and languages to build trust and get information.
Exactly. Detective Sunday knew that he and the bilingual officer, they worked together, going back over old leads, talking to people, really trying to break through that wall of silence.
Did they get anywhere?
Not right away. But Detective Sunday had some new ideas. He made flyers with Manuel's picture and information about the case. He put them all over Freeport, especially in places where Manuel might have been.
Putting the case back in the public eye. Did anyone come forward after seeing the flyers?
Not at first. But Detective Sunday didn't stop there. He even put Manuel's story on TV ads to reach more people. And then in January 2023, he got a new lead. A good one.
Wow. After all that time, that must have been huge. What was the lead?
I can't say exactly what the tip was, but I can tell you that it made Detective Sunday take another look at all the evidence, especially the DNA.
DNA technology has come a long way since 2004. It's amazing what they can do now, even with just a tiny bit of DNA.
You're telling me that's what gave Detective Sunday hope? He talked about a new technology called MVAC. It's basically a vacuum that sucks up all the DNA on something. Like, imagine a soda can that a bunch of people have touched. This technology can find and identify even the smallest DNA profiles that they might have missed in the first investigation.
That sounds like science fiction. But in this case, it could be what they need to finally find out who killed Manuel.
That's what we're hoping for. Detective Sunday was really positive about this new technology. He thinks it could be the breakthrough they've been waiting for. They sent the evidence to be analyzed, and now they're waiting for the results.
So while we wait for those results,
Yeah.
what are the big questions left in this case? What are we still trying to understand?
Even if they get a match from the DNA, they still don't know why Manuel was murdered. What would make someone kill this young man who was just working hard to support his family?
Was it a robbery gone wrong? A fight? Something else entirely? It almost seems like someone wanted him dead specifically because they went to all that trouble to move and hide his body.
That's a good point. The circumstances around his death don't really make sense. Why was he killed, and why did they leave his body in that particular spot?
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. And the most important piece is figuring out why.
Exactly. And we have to remember the bigger picture here. Manuel's story shows how vulnerable undocumented immigrants are. They're often too afraid to go to the police, even when they're the victims of a crime.
It's a sad fact that so many people live with that fear, and it makes them easy targets.
That's why it's so important to talk about cases like Manuel's. They show us the problems, the challenges for law enforcement, and how important it is to understand and care.
We need to make sure everyone feels safe talking to the police, no matter what their immigration status is, because everyone deserves justice.
Absolutely. And sometimes even the smallest bit of information can make a big difference. Something you might not even think is important. Could be the missing piece that the investigators need.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. And it makes you think about how hard it is to solve crimes when immigrants are involved.
Right, that fear. They don't want to talk to the police, even when they're the victims. It's tough to get past that.
And with Manuel, it feels like that fear spread through the whole community. No one would talk, even if it meant helping solve his murder.
You can understand why, though. For a lot of undocumented immigrants, getting deported is scarier than anything else. They could lose their jobs, be separated from their families, face a really uncertain future.
It's heartbreaking. They're already vulnerable, and this fear isolates them even more, makes them easier to take advantage of.
That's exactly why we need to talk about cases like Manuel's. They show us the problems, the challenges for law enforcement, and how much we need to understand and have empathy.
We have to create a place where everyone feels safe talking to the police. No matter their immigration status, everyone deserves justice.
I agree. And sometimes the smallest detail can make all the difference. Something you might not even think is important could be the missing piece the investigators need.
That's why we're asking anyone who might know something about Manuel's case to please contact the Walton County Sheriff's Office. Their info is on our website and in the show notes.
Don't wait. Even if you think it's not a big deal, let the authorities decide. Your tip could be the one that finally gets justice for Manuel.
This deep dive into Manuel's story, it's been a reminder of how powerful fear is, how much unsolved crimes affect people, and how important it is for everyone to get involved.
Detective Sunday, going back to that case, determined to find answers. It gives you hope, not just for Manuel's family, but for anyone looking for justice for someone they lost.
And we can all do our part by listening, by sharing Manuel's story, by staying aware. We can make sure he's not forgotten.
Let's keep this conversation going. If you thought this deep dive was interesting, please share it, subscribe to our podcast, and join us for our next episode. We'll keep exploring the complicated world we live in.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Let's hope we can help close this case and make sure Manuel Mosqueda Ruiz is never forgotten.